Imagine standing at the edge of a battlefield, the air thick with tension, when suddenly the ground shakes. But it's not artillery or an explosion from a nearby tank. It's the sound of something else, something massive rumbling toward you. Then the first shell lands. It's not just any shell, it's a 2-ton monster of metal and fire, thundering down with the power to level entire buildings with a single hit. This was no ordinary weapon. This was the German railway gun. The German railway gun, a name that strikes fear into the hearts of those who were there, and a concept that seemed to defy the limits of engineering. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol of ambition, desperation, and, above all, a display of raw, terrifying power. Developed during World War II, it was the brainchild of the German military's desire for an answer to the fortress-like defenses that were stalling their advances. But how did this unimaginable beast come to life? And why was it created in the first place? It all started with the growing frustration of Germany's inability to breach the heavily fortified positions of the Allies. During the early years of the war, particularly in the siege of France and the infamous Maginot Line, German commanders realized that conventional artillery and air bombardments just weren't enough. So, they turned to something that could strike fear in the hearts of their enemies, like never before. A weapon so powerful it could not only destroy fortifications, but shatter the will to resist. The man behind this idea was a German engineer named Konrad Zuse, who had spent years designing heavy weaponry capable of immense destructive power. His vision was simple: to build a gun so large, so destructive, that it would leave the Allies with no choice but to surrender. In 1940, after witnessing the failure of more conventional tactics, the German military officially greenlit the project. And from that, the Schwerer Gustav was born. What was so frightening about the Schwerer Gustav wasn't just its sheer size. At over 130 feet long and weighing nearly 1,350 tons, it was a literal moving fortress. But this wasn't just some giant relic of an overambitious engineering mind. The real danger lay in its ability to fire shells weighing up to 7 tons. Shells that could penetrate thick concrete and steel, obliterating entire bunkers or railway stations with a single blast. But there was a question lingering over everyone's minds. Could this monstrous weapon really be the game changer the Germans hoped it would be? And what would happen when the Allies caught wind of its power? The answer would come soon, and it would surprise everyone. Would this innovation spell doom for the Allies, or would it be a symbol of doomed overreach? Stick around as the tension builds, because the next chapter of this story is anything but predictable. It wasn't long before the Schwerer Gustav made its presence known. When the German military unveiled their giant railway gun in 1941, the world had to pause for a moment to grasp what they were seeing. This wasn't just a piece of artillery. It was an engineering marvel, one that seemed to belong more in a science fiction novel than on a battlefield. The gun's size alone was enough to give anyone pause, but it was the firepower it promised that truly terrified the Allies. The weapon was designed for one thing: to obliterate the enemy's most fortified positions. And in the summer of 1942, the Germans decided to test their creation in the field. The location chosen for the first trial? The Soviet city of Sevastopol, a stronghold on the Crimean Peninsula that had resisted German advances for over a year. The Soviets had built massive fortifications around the city, with concrete bunkers and entrenched positions that made any attempt to capture it a near impossible task. Enter the Schwerer Gustav. For weeks, the gun was carefully transported by rail, a slow and meticulous operation that itself became a spectacle. Once positioned, it wasn't just the size that made the gun terrifying, it was the methodical way it operated. The crew was required to move several tons of equipment just to prepare each shot. It would take hours to set up, loading one massive shell after another, the entire process an exercise in precision and patience. But the moment that first shell left the gun's massive barrel, that was when history was made. The earth trembled, and Sevastopol's defenses felt the wrath of the colossal artillery piece. The first shot, a thunderous blast, struck deep into the heart of the Soviet defenses. It wasn't just a hit, it was a cataclysm. Concrete crumbled, fortifications were erased, and soldiers who had spent months preparing for this very moment found themselves helpless before this towering force. Yet, even as the initial shockwave passed, something began to stir in the minds of the Soviets. They knew the Germans couldn't hide such a weapon forever. This behemoth, though terrifying, also had glaring weaknesses. Its size made it vulnerable. It was slow, unwieldy, and could only be used in certain areas where rail tracks could reach. Worse, every shot took hours to prepare, giving the Allies precious time to adapt. But the question remained, could the Germans keep up this terrifying pace of destruction? Or would the sheer size of the weapon ultimately doom it? And in the face of such overwhelming force, what would the human cost be? The next few months would reveal whether the Schwerer Gustav was truly the tide turner the Germans had hoped for, or whether the Allies would find a way to turn the tables. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and every commander, every soldier knew that the fate of the war could hinge on this single weapon. The next chapter would show whether courage, ingenuity, and sheer desperation could outlast the mighty roar of the Schwerer Gustav. Would this monster of metal prove its worth, or would it be the very thing that led to its creator's downfall? And as the gun fired again and again, a chilling question hung in the air. Could anything truly stand against the power of this iron giant? As the war raged on, the Schwerer Gustav's true limitations began to show. Despite the initial shock of its power, its size and complexity turned out to be more of a curse than a blessing. For all its potential, this colossal weapon was proving to be a logistical nightmare for the German army. The gun's crew of over 250 men required specialized training just to operate it. The sheer weight of the gun meant it had to be carefully positioned on pre-existing rail tracks, and getting it into place could take days. Its enormous shells were no small feat either, each one weighing several tons and requiring massive cranes to load into the barrel. On top of that, the gun could only fire a limited number of rounds per day. Each shot was a labor of love, taking hours to prepare and execute. The Germans could only fire a handful of shells before the gun needed to be reloaded, checked, and calibrated. It became increasingly clear that despite its terrifying power, the Schwerer Gustav was not the magic bullet the Germans had hoped for. It was simply too slow, too cumbersome, and too expensive to maintain. Worse, it was vulnerable. It couldn't be hidden, and every time it fired, it revealed its position to the Allies. The Soviets, who had already suffered immensely under its bombardment, were quick to react. They adapted, countering the German gun with their own tactics, using mobility, deception, and precision strikes to outmaneuver it. The turning point came in the summer of 1944, during the Allied invasion of Normandy. As the Allies began to push further into France, the Germans were forced to relocate their artillery. The Schwerer Gustav, which had been a symbol of their might, now seemed more like a burden. It had to be transported across treacherous terrain, and its cumbersome size made it an easy target for Allied bombers. And when the Luftwaffe couldn't protect it, the inevitable happened. On August 17, 1944, just a few weeks after the invasion, Allied bombers, in a bold and well-coordinated strike, found the Schwerer Gustav. They pounded it with everything they had, hitting its vulnerable components and rendering it useless. With one of the most powerful weapons ever conceived reduced to rubble, the German military had lost more than just a gun. They had lost their last great hope of turning the tide of the war. Yet, despite the destruction of the Schwerer Gustav, there was a bitter irony to it all. The Germans had poured so much effort into creating a weapon of mass destruction, believing it would break the back of the Allies. Instead, it ended up as a monument to hubris, a reminder that no weapon, no matter how powerful, could guarantee victory if it was built on a foundation of overconfidence and miscalculation. But the question remains, was the Schwerer Gustav a failure, or was it a last, desperate attempt at redemption? A weapon born from ambition, fear, and the unyielding desire to overcome an enemy that seemed insurmountable. What does it say about the men who built it, the soldiers who fired it, and the generals who ordered it into battle? In the end, the iron giant that was supposed to crush the enemy had only hastened the fall of its creators. It wasn't just the gun that fell. It was the ideology behind it. As the war wound down, the remnants of the Schwerer Gustav were quietly forgotten, a casualty of war and a testament to the fleeting nature of military might. The Allies had shown the world that no matter how devastating a weapon, there would always be a way to overcome it. And so, the most powerful artillery piece ever built became just another footnote in the tragedy of war, a symbol of how even the greatest machines of destruction can fall, and how the human spirit can outlast even the most terrifying of weapons. The story of the Schwerer Gustav isn't just a tale of technological innovation. It's a story of humanity in the face of overwhelming pressure. It speaks to our ability to create things of unimaginable power, but also to the fragility of those creations when weighed against the ingenuity, determination, and adaptability of the human will. It's a reminder that even in war, where destruction reigns, there's always room for hope, for change, and ultimately for redemption. So, what do you think? Was the Schwerer Gustav just another symbol of the futile arms race? Or does it represent something deeper? A final defiant stand against a world that was slipping out of Germany's grasp? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most iconic weapons, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and share this story with fellow military and history enthusiasts. There's always more to uncover, and I'll see you in the next one.